Today we have the most misinterpreted books that I've ever read. I'm going to try to hold these all up, but it's difficult because they're all different sizes. But the reason I'm making this book is because I feel like some of the books I've reviewed, I've either gotten weird comments that are just completely off base that like tell me you didn't read it without telling me you didn't read it, or I see different interpretations online that I just think are incorrect. So these are the books that I've read that I think are the most misinterpreted. I probably missed some. Let me know in the comments if I did. Let me know, especially if I haven't read it. I'll be interested to pick those books up. But with that said, let's get into the first book. The first book is Ayn Rand. What is this? This one's called The Virtue of Selfishness. And this is something I'm actually reading right now. I'm not even done with it, but I can already tell you it's going to be misinterpreted. It's going to be misunderstood. And the reason that it's going to be misunderstood is because when you hear selfishness, you hear a very, very low effort interpretation of this idea. Like, to most people, selfishness is putting yourself first, putting yourself above others. But this is not at all what Ayn Rand talks about. And in fact, this is what Ayn Rand would call not selfishness, because she likes to bring a distinction between actual selfishness and pretending to be selfish, or uneducated or unrighteous or unauthentic selfishness. And that's really what she's talking about. She's really talking about these concepts, because when she talks about selfishness, she's referring to doing things because you want to do them, doing things because they make you happy, doing things because they give you fulfillment, because they're well thought out, not going to college because your parents told you to go to college. Like, you may think that's a personal decision you made, but it's really just fear. It's really just lack of courage. It's really just you feeling like you have a duty and a sense of morality that you have to live your life in these other people's framework. And this is really what Ayn Rand is talking about. I find it so interesting because it's something that I really, really, really agree with when it comes to selfishness. Like, I don't think selfishness is a bad thing. I think when you put yourself above others, that's a bad thing. But when you live true and authentic to who you really are, that's the best way to get back to the world, because no one else is you. No one else has the combination of your genetics and your exact experience, and thus to deny exactly who you are, to not be selfish, to not live as you really are, is to do the world a disservice. Because the only way the world can become better, this is the only thing that I think can fix the world, is to be the change you want to see in the world. That's what Gandhi said. I think Gandhi embodied this idea perfectly, and I think if you look at his life and if you look at his example, he is an inspiration to so many people, and it's because he lived in this framework. He lived in this way. He did his own thing. As Frank Sinatra said, I did it my way. And this is what this entire book is about. But I promise you, there are people who read this book or read any of Ayn Rand's works and go, well, she was selfish, she was this, she was that, she was a hedonist. And it's like, I'm telling you, like, this is a book that's very, very, very worth your time and very worth going through, because it has some very interesting ideas on what it means to be an individual and what it means to find happiness in such a unevolved and corrupt world. But with that said, we'll get into the next book. The next book is 1984. If you haven't read 1984 by now, I really urge you to, because it's one of the best books about government overreach. It's one of the best examples of what happens when people don't let their voices be heard, when people don't, put their foot down and say, this can't happen, this shouldn't happen. One of Orwell's final speeches, one of his final interviews, he said, don't let it happen. And he was really, really talking about this. He was really talking about government overreach. But the thing about 1984 that gets misinterpreted is you have political pundits, you have politicians saying it's literally 1984. And that's really the most ironic part about the book, is like, the whole book is talking about government overreach, both left and right. It's talking about what the natural extent of governments become when people stop pushing back, when people stop, saying, we shouldn't have this, we shouldn't have this, I don't support you on this. Like, think about it nowadays. Like, in America, it's worse than ever. It's like, people, I would say 2/3 of the country blindly vote for whatever political affiliation they already have. They don't look at the policies. They just adopt the policies of the party. And it's this exact thing that leads to 1984. It's this exact thing that leads to the government overreach that these people are fighting against. And it's like, it's so weird to think that the people who, are going to eventually be the people that are taking away your rights are using this book to justify it. And it's almost ironic, and it's kind of sad at the same time. And I feel like Orwell would be really, really, really disgusted with the way that 1984 is read, with the way most of his works are read, because people fixate on a certain leader. People fixate on Stalin. They fixate on other dictators, on other people. And instead of doing this, you're really meant to take the lessons away. You're really meant to observe what it is when a political party is consolidating power. Observe what it means when these movements are becoming really, really strong, and what it means when people just blindly follow these leaders and these people that are basically saying the ends justify the mean. And that's really the sad part about 1984. But 1984 is a great book. I really think you should read it, but I really think you should read it from the context of this is a work to warn against all governments. This is a work to warn against what happens when people blindly follow governments and don't think for themselves and don't make the politicians earn their votes. Because, there's a part of the Tao Te Ching that says the more laws you have, the more criminals you have. And every day there's more legislation written. Every day these people try to fix the world through these laws and take away more and more and more and more of our rights. And at a certain point we have to understand that, like, what is going on right now is not good for us. What is going on right now is not the best path forward, and there's probably another solution. But with that said, we'll get into the next book. So the next book is actually a series of stories from Kafka, and one particular story is the one that I want to talk about. A Hunger Artist is what it's called. And the thing about Kafka is I feel like most people have a very negative view of Kafka, a very depressing view of Kafka, and I think those elements are certainly there. I think Kafka certainly expressed some of his dissatisfaction with life in his writings. But at the same time, I recently heard a story that Kafka would keep his neighbors up writing because in the middle of the night he'd just be laughing hysterically at the stories he was writing. So, like, that's one saving grace about him. But A Hunger Artist on its face is a very depressing story, but it actually has a very inspiring message at the end because, historical context about Franz Kafka. Franz Kafka was a writer that never got any sort of success during his lifetime. He's one of the best writers ever, but he was basically unrecognized during his lifetime. And the story he's writing on his deathbed really solidifies that he went out happy, he went out smiling. And the story is A Hunger Artist. And it very much reflects Kafka's own mortality because Kafka was dying of tuberculosis and his throat was closed and he couldn't eat anymore. So it's almost poetic in the sense that the story he's writing about is a guy that loves to not eat, that loves to not, consume any food and starve himself. And the story goes, there is a hunger artist and his art is basically starving himself in front of people, and everyone watches and everyone's amazed by how this guy doesn't have to eat, by this guy that really just sits there for days and doesn't really do anything. And originally he draws huge crowds, but as time goes on, he stops becoming popular. People stop paying attention to him, and eventually he's reduced to being in a cage at like a carnival, at like a fair. And, even the carnival, even the fair forgets about him, and they like throw a tiger in the cage or a panther. I can't remember what they put nearby, but basically his dying moments, he's talking to whatever, some guy that finds him, and he's like, how many days have I not eaten for? And the guy doesn't know, and he's forgotten, but he knows he beat his record. He knows he created the greatest achievement of his lifetime, and he dies happy. And he dies with the recognition that he did something great and he did it for himself. And this is very much analogous of Kafka's own life, because Kafka's editing this story on his deathbed, and on his deathbed he's coming to the realization that he created the art for the sake of art. He didn't create art for the sake of others. He didn't create art for the sake of recognition. He did it for his own satisfaction. He did it because it allowed him to express an aspect of himself that otherwise would go unexpressed. And to me, that's super inspiring. And to me, that's Kafka's acceptance of his mortality, his acceptance of his life. And I think it really is a beautiful and poetic way to go out. But with that said, we'll get into the next book. The next book is The 48 Laws of Power. This book is very weird, because people online seem to think it's the most toxic book ever. And again, tell me you've not read this book without telling me you have not read this book. The 48 Laws of Power, as said by the author Robert Greene, is a book to help people who continually get taken advantage of in the workforce. There are certain unspoken rules and games that go on all around us that very many people are not aware of. And the reason Robert Greene wrote this is because, while he was in the workforce, while he was working for these movies and being a researcher and all of these things, like, he was doing great work, but he kept getting passed over because he didn't play the political games. And, he really said that this book is for people to recognize the people that are taking advantage of them and ensure that they can make the most out of their lives. It's really a defense mechanism. And he also goes on to say that like a true Machiavellian figure does not need the 48 laws of power to manipulate people. A true Machiavellian figure already has those skills. Let alone anyone that wants to become a Machiavellian figure. You need so much more than to just read this book. This book, for the most part, is interesting historical facts with a lesson that somehow broadly ties into it. And a lot of the times it's like something that you can't even really apply in a day-to-day life. But a lot of the rules are very, very inspiring. A lot of the rules are things that really we should be taught from a young age, but we're never really instructed on. Like the first law of power is never put yourself above the master, never outshine the master, it's called. And basically what that means is if you do something great and the CEO of the company recognizes you and says this, says that, well, guess what? Now your boss, now the person that controls your paycheck, now the person that employs you, now they don't like you because you outshine them, because you looked good in front of their boss's boss's boss. And now that this has happened, they're going to inherently feel less of themselves. And if you make someone above you that has power over you feel less of themselves, guess what? They're probably going to take it out on you. And this is the idea that like whenever you do something great, always give credit to your boss. Always give credit to the person that is above you. Always give credit to the patron. This is what the great Renaissance artists would do. When the great Renaissance artists would create a great work, they would say, I couldn't do this without my patron. I couldn't do this without the person that paid for it. I could never have created such great art without the support that these people gave it. And you know, even they dedicated aspects, they dedicated paintings, they did all of these things for their patrons just so that they could continue to create their art. It's almost like you have to in some way make the person above you feel good about themselves. It's almost like you have to do like some sort of therapy for these people. And I think that's one of the most foundational laws, but that's really what most of the laws are. Most of the laws are simple things like this that'll help you from getting manipulated. And I think if you read the book with this idea, then you can really go out into the world and make the most of yourself. Because if you're anything like me, you're someone that like wears their heart on the sleeves, that doesn't play the political games. And like there's been so many times in my life when I've been just taken advantage of or lost out on opportunities or in some way did not get the result I really deserved simply because I did not play the games of power, simply because I did not understand these laws. And I think it's a great book to read if you've really never understood any sort of psychology, any sort of philosophy, because it will give you a basic overview of these concepts. It will give you a basic understanding of some psychological, some philosophical, and some historical ideas that really can just interest you. Because overall, I don't think the book is like super applicable. Like it's not a book that I'd be like, you have to read, but I just think it's an interesting book because I hate reading history. I don't really like going into the granular details of these facts and all of these things, but to me it's super interesting to get a brief overview of Napoleon, of Leonardo da Vinci, of all of these figures of that sort of like, and really just learn a lesson from their experience. I think it's just such a cool concept. The book is so fun to read, and it even has a really good audiobook to follow along to. So like whatever you do, whether you want to pick this up, whether you want to get the audiobook, I think it's a great thing to spend your time with. But I would not say it's a must read, but it definitely does not live up to the evil reputation it gets. I think a lot of that's just clever marketing. I mean, you had the Oregon State Prison ban it, and I think that really was the greatest salesperson for Robert Greene, because you know, when you hear some book getting banned, it usually just ups its profile. It usually just ups its sales. So with that said, we'll get into the next book. The next book is The Will to Power. And The Will to Power, it really is misinterpreted for unfortunate historical reasons. Basically, this book is not really a book that was written by Nietzsche. It wasn't intended to be a book. It's Nietzsche's journals. And because of that, it basically got taken by Nietzsche's sister, who married an avowed anti-Semite, and then gave it to, the 1940s German political party, the Nazis, and they kind of used it as a justification for a lot of the stuff they're doing. But like, when you hear that, you're just like, these people were the biggest idiots ever, because Nietzsche was against all conformity. Nietzsche was against all lacking of individual thought. And what is a greater lacking of individual thought than authoritarian government? It's just so funny to see how like so many people could read this so poorly and so many people could read the exact book that I read, and I was like, this is one of the greatest works of nonconformity that I've ever read. And these conformists were like, this is a justification for our ideology. And it's funny. I'll give a brief overview of some of the things that it talks about. Like, to Nietzsche, to conform is to lower the value of the individual. Whenever you conform, it means that you're not living up to your highest ideal. And if you're not living up to your highest ideal, then you cannot elevate humanity as much as possible. This is what Nietzsche called the Übermensch, the idea that if you embody the idealized version of yourself and you carry that into the world without fear, without conformity, without falling subservient to any sort of political ideology or any sort of philosophical ideology or any sort of religious or any group in general, that is how you elevate the world the most, because that's when you can be most yourself. And all conformity is created by fear. All conformity is created by things that pull us downward, that keep us stuck, that keep us from elevating our ideas, that keep us tied to history, that keep us tied to the purely rational and the purely material world. And what Nietzsche is really talking about is like the human mind, when it's unshackled, is capable of great things, but when it's shackled to set and rigid beliefs, then it becomes something that is very, very bastardized and something that is very, very off base of what it really can be open to. And I think that's really an inspiring idea. The easiest way to understand Nietzsche is to first read Emerson, because Nietzsche describes himself as Emerson's like twin when it comes to their philosophical beliefs. They're like twin flames or brothers of the fire or something along that. Like he described themselves as that. So when you read Nietzsche in that context, it really makes a lot more sense, and it really makes the beliefs a lot more inspiring, because I think the main problem with Nietzsche is Nietzsche set out as to break humans away from the beliefs that were shackling them to lesser ideals, to lesser states of consciousness, to lesser forms. But he eventually fell victim to these own things because he really did not get the success he deserved in his lifetime. And Nietzsche was someone with a giant ego. He was someone that was a genius that really, really, really didn't get any sort of respect that he really should have garnered. And it's simply because he was so smart that no one during his time understood him. And it's only after the fact that you can look back and go, well, this guy was saying something. So with that said, we'll get into the last book. The last book is The Essential Schopenhauer. This is really just mostly excerpts from the Will and World as Will and Representations and Other Writings. I don't know why it's so hard to say. It must just be through the translation that the title doesn't make sense, but The World as Will and Representations basically covers two main ideas. It's the idea that we are ruled by the Platonic ideal of forms. So if you don't know what the Platonic ideal of forms is, it's the idea that there is more than what we see. And if you need proof of that, just understand that everything in front of you that has color does not have color. It's merely the vibration of the atoms that give the appearance of colors. And once you understand stuff like that, you understand that there's a certain element of imperceptibility about the world that goes to form our opinions, that goes to shape our opinions. And most people like to think that we live in the Aristotelian form of things, where what you see is what it is. But I think if you live this way, not only is it boring, but it's also very limiting, because it makes the world dull. It makes the world non-moving, and it really denies fundamental aspects of physics, as long as fundamental aspects of how everything works. But with that said, the later, or the more interesting aspect of the book is the will to live. I was about to say the will to power. The will to power is Nietzsche's extension of Schopenhauer's philosophy, but the will to live really is, we are all kind of implicitly controlled by this need for survival. So this is really where Freud's psychosexual theory comes from, because there's two fundamental elements to human existence. It's survival and procreation, and these both preserve our will to live. This both preserves our mortality and makes it so that we can live on into further generations. And Schopenhauer believed that everything that we do is basically controlled by this need to survive, by this need to continue, whether it's through having children, whether it's through robbing from someone at the expense of that person, and really it lowers humanity because it makes us subservient to like a non-rational force that doesn't always make the best decision. Like basically Schopenhauer explained that all war is self-preservation, and most wars are very, very dumb because they're over such a small issue, over such a thing that is way further down the line, and it's really just aggression and the idea that like if we do this then we can survive, if we do this then we can do this. Like that's really what Schopenhauer is saying. And the reason I think Schopenhauer is misinterpreted is because people see Schopenhauer's philosophy and they don't see the metaphysical elements of it, because Schopenhauer basically describes the will to live as the lower natures of man, as the more biological and hardwired natures to man. But then Schopenhauer gives you an option to overcome these things. Schopenhauer basically explains that like once you get beyond the will to live, then that's where real creation comes from. And what he's basically talking about is the idea of understanding Wu Wei, the idea of understanding that you are not your mind, that you are more than your mind. And it sort of starts breaching into more West or Eastern philosophy, and I think that's really where Schopenhauer has the most to say, because I think whenever you have a Western mind talk about Eastern ideas, then you can really gain the greatest insights, because it doesn't really benefit me much to read it in an Eastern philosophical book because I've been born in a Western mindset. So like this is something that Carl Jung said. He said that basically to a Westerner it's very difficult to meditate because we're told to be urgency, 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 whereas in the East it's more laid back. As in the East it's more like enjoy the moment. So like those ideas make much more sense to a person that was raised in that versus other. But that's really why I think Schopenhauer is misinterpreted, because I think people solely focus on his more Western ideas and don't focus on his Eastern ideas, because Schopenhauer's basic summation of his whole philosophy is that the living in the world is to suffer, but it's the small moments of happiness that we find in the suffering that make it worth living for. So think about it this way, like Khalil Gibran probably says it the best: every sorrow deepens our joy. Every time we experience pain, it makes it so that we can experience happiness. And basically what Schopenhauer is saying is that through the suffering we can appreciate the good times. Without the suffering we can't appreciate the good times. And you know, that's why I find Schopenhauer interesting, philosophical, and inspiring in some ways. But in other ways, he is very much a pessimist. But when you get past the pessimism and understand why he's doing it, then I think you can get to the deeper aspects of his ideas. But with that said, I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. Peace out. I will catch you in the next one.